Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody from New York City. My name is Andreas Deutschmann. I work as a managing director for Avalon Securities, a female-owned boutique investment bank here in New York City. In my past, I've led teams in due diligence, valuation, portfolio management, risk management, financial modeling with companies like JP Morgan, where I was a managing director, John Hancock, where I was a vice president, Deloitte & Touche, where I was a manager, and I carried out my duties in New York, Chicago, Boston, Luxembourg, Zurich, Vienna, Singapore, and Tokyo. And recently I taught the venture capital course at the Central European University in Budapest, which was fun for girls. The end.
All right.
Farhan, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Farhan Naqvi. I'm the CFO of iLearning Engines. We are a leading learning and workflow automation firm. We've been in business for almost 14 years now, and we went public through the de-SPAC route earlier this year. I have been with the firm for almost 5 years, and prior to that, I was doing technology investment banking on the West Coast for almost 10 years.
Great. So Konstantin is online, but he is not available right now. So, and Darwin should be logging in any minute. So why don't we get started, and then we'll move over as the other people join. So can you talk about the current trend in AI in terms of the general marketplace, and do you think things are getting a little bit frothy, or what are your thoughts in terms of opportunity? Konstantin, can you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, my name is Konstantin. I run TenViz. We build and offer the clients in the investment management community predictive tools which use AI to forecast capital markets, rates, bonds, commodities, equities, and so on.
Right. Yeah. So talk about the general marketplace, and then talk about where you guys are in the market. And I think everybody uses ChatGPT as a point of reference. Can you talk about how you're different than ChatGPT, et cetera? So, or if you use it. Andreas, why don't you start, and then we'll go over to Konstantin and then Farhan.
So you want me to start?
Yeah.
Yes, we do use ChatGPT. We think it gives us some interesting insights. For example, we're looking at innovative investing, and we're looking at sectors like AI, cyber, block, gaming, crypto, Web3, cloud, VR, metaverse, 3D, robots, and drones. We come up with a number of parameters to invest them by, and then we have it sorted out. And so, of course, there's always a risk of hallucination and whatnot. So we overlay some of our financial experience, in my case, over 20, and we find that on a relative base weighting, AI rates AI is the #1 investment category, followed by cyber, block, gaming, crypto, Web3, cloud, VR, metaverse, 3D, robots, and drones. We have plenty to talk about individually, but this is kind of a first pass on something we're working on for our investors.
Great, and maybe later we can talk about whether AI actually increases the value of some of these older vintage companies. So, Konstantin?
We actually build our own AI. We call it, just to build it with context. Generative AI, i.e. LLM models, it's a very, very, very small subset of what AI could potentially do. It's really, really very tiny, like maybe it's very popularized right now, but that's small fraction of what AI can do. Essentially, what generative AI does, essentially looks mostly with an existing body of knowledge to extract either existing relationships or pretty close relationships, which are still not obvious. But there is no way in hell generative AI will tell you something about the future. So we built predictive AI, completely different approach, which we use for forecast investing.
Okay, Farhan?
Yep, I think Konstantin nailed it. There is so much more to AI than just Gen AI. And it's not as if AI just sprung on the scene with the ChatGPT being put out for public. AI has been in the works for decades, if not longer. So we as a company, we were founded in 2010. The founder of our company has been doing AI much before than that. We've been doing AI, building AI software since 2010. And where we have landed up is we are actually one of the few businesses who've been able to build enterprise use case using the underlying AI technology. And there's a lot of talk about large language models being out there. What we have found to be useful is deploying small language models, if you can call them that, in different industries. So just to take an example, we have 40 plus proprietary models that we built out on our own that we deploy depending on what the use case is. So going back to what Konstantin said, LLMs and Gen AI is just a very small part of the whole AI revolution. There's so many things that are being improved and being made better by applying the broader AI tech.
And so outside of the area where you're in and outside of large language models, where do you think are the best applications of AI today?
For me, I think if you look at the large players, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Gemini, Mistral, they've kind of used the same varieties of AI across very large, broad data sets that may not exactly be differentiated. So it's kind of like you got a situation where you've got some people working on ChatGPT or Copilot or whatnot, and it's like you've given them all the same advantage. It's like taking the NBA basketball league and giving every player 3 extra inches of height, and then wondering if there'll be different outcomes in the games and the championships and whatnot. But I think what the gentleman, Farhan and Konstantin, came up with, we're talking about some differentiated horsepower on the algorithm side and some differentiated data is exactly where we need to go.
Konstantin, any thoughts? Outside of what you're doing, what's interesting parts of AI?
Yeah, kind of building up on what Andreas has mentioned, and I think Farhan was actually heading that way too. It all comes to the use cases, right? As Farhan was saying, essentially we were using AI, all of us, without even knowing it for almost decades, right? Basically, don't forget, planes are 99% flown by computers. So it's kind of like a rhetorical question, are you using your AI? You were doing that without even knowing it. So I think it comes to understanding what the use cases are and what we're after. I will only speak for the financial services, but before I go there, generative and LLM like AIs probably should be very good for in the law profession, right? Actually, to the best of my knowledge, when I talk to people in the related fields, I don't see the people innovating a lot using true generative AI in the field of law, even though it's almost perfectly suited for that. But let me speak about the field of finance and investing, specifically investing. That's what we do, right? That's our expertise. That's what we do pretty well. And the essence is we forecast markets like stocks and bonds and commodities with inherent uncertainty. And the only goal in that exercise is to outperform the humans. So nobody knows the future for sure. But what we found a way to that machines can extract some interesting relationships within time series, and based on that, we see these trends either breaking or evolving further. That's an idea. Understand what you're after, and sort of let's start building it backward. What is a use case? What exactly we're trying to do instead of like, oh, this is a magnificent opportunity, a magnificent tool, and like, so that's our approach.
Fantastic, great. And Farhan, can you talk some more about what you're doing? I know that you talked about a little bit, but can you talk about other areas outside of what you're doing right now?
Well, so in terms of where we are deploying our tech, we have 12 verticals that span from oil and gas to insurance to healthcare to education. And depending on what the market dynamics are, different verticals use AI tech and our model very different. So that's why at a functional level, we are able to cover from learning automation to workflow automation, depending on what the use case is. I'll borrow from one of the points that Andreas mentioned, which is about data. So most people probably are unable to appreciate that the value that data has in this whole AI ecosystem. Like, AI systems get successful or they break down, not on the basis of the architecture that is used to build them up. They perform well or they do not perform well, depending on the data that is being used to train them. So securing that data and sanitizing that data is as important as anything else if you're building an AI system and trying to make it work. So different people have tried to address that issue very differently. We've found a unique solution which works for us, and which is procuring data from the source. Like, so if we are deploying a model in the oil and gas space, for example, we would want it to be trained on data produced by the oil and gas industry. So procuring that kind of data and making sure that we have that data pipeline set up, I think is very, very critical to the success of our operation and any AI operation in general.
So can you guys talk a little bit about, I just want to drill down on this whole data aspect, because it seems like in lots of areas, there's problems with data where obviously it's there's human error in data, and also there's limited access to all the data you're trying to, so like, for example, if you have an insurance product or if you have an insurance application, you either have to get insurers to go along with you so you can train the data for their application, or you need to source the information one way or the other. So how do you take that step? Konstantin, same with you. I mean, is most of the data that you work with, is that public knowledge, publicly available, or do you work with more specialized data? Maybe you guys can all talk about that. Konstantin?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we mostly use public data, either available for free or we actually purchase a lot of data but essentially it's data available to the market, right? It just like we go through the enormous number of time series every day, like so. And that's actually tells us actually one of the bottlenecks. There is no. I think Farhan was kind of leading to that. If you take as much everything in the world and try to boil the ocean, you would not get much, right? You would not get much. You need to go for the specific elements of data that you have a good fundamental expertise, like domain expertise, that should likely say, yes, there's got to be some nuggets of gold in this ore before you start going too deeply. So that's what we do. Not only we look for we take millions of, like maybe 500,000 time series every 15 minutes or so. So it's not enormous, but it's big enough given complexities of possible interactions. But the idea is actually we know for sure these relationships are not fully understood and interpreted.
What's the application? Is it used for trading or for investment decisions, or?
Marty, that's a great question, and I appreciate you saying that. Yes, it's used for investment decisions, and that's actually a very important qualifier, because 99.999% of the AI used in the investment community right now is used mostly for trading and some sort of back office automation. Very, very, very little of that is used for mid-term or long-term investing. Even the biggest and the most established shops, and we talk and work with most of them, or at least talk to them, they actually still, again, mostly use it to automate existing processes, or some sort of back office operations. So in order, when it comes to, say, making decisions like, hey, should we be buying US treasuries or selling technology stocks or buying Brazilian stocks, it's still mostly done by humans, very subjectively. And we think our opportunity is to break this third. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you're saying that the existing application is to take traditional or internal processes and automate them rather than to think about new ways to do the business.
Correct. And that speaks to the core of most AI models, including generative AI, which are essentially the technical term is classifying models. So they look at the variety of possible outcomes and they smartly classify them where the way of classification is pretty established, right? You see, like, it started many, many years ago, like, again, Farhan has referred to that with fraud detection and so on, right? Where you can actually say with a high degree of certainty that was a fraudulent transaction. Yet, when it comes to future investment decisions, are very, very few people actually, close to none, are using them for the future.
Farhan, can you talk about how do you get data? How do you acquire it? And is it something that requires, your models to learn from internal corporate data, or do you have other data sets that you use that you are able to acquire?
So we buy data in a lot of instances. We buy it from the source, the people generating that data. So taking a hypothetical example, if we are deploying a model that has been one of the 40 plus models that we have built, if you're deploying one of those, say in the oil and gas space, right? Before it actually gets trained and deployed on the client site, that our model gets trained on industry-specific data. And the industry-specific data is the data that we have purchased from oil and gas industry players, which is then used to train the AI model before it gets deployed.
And then, do you track how the models change once they are deployed into a corporation?
So, well, if you look at AI models, it's the process is you take data, you train the model that you have, it produces an output. Now, if you put this into a recursive loop, wherein the output is being used by the people to generate more data, then it's a self-reinforcing process. You're generating very relevant, updated data that can then be used to train the model again. So the output gets better and better.
Right. Do most clients have that purpose?
So if you think about it from the client side, at the end of it, it's the client's data that is being used to train the model that eventually produces the output or the product that the client themselves is using. Right? So it gets very, very customized to the client's use case. It's like using the client's institutional knowledge that they've built over years, inputting that into an AI model, and then using the output from that AI model for that particular client. That's the way we are able to customize and automate the workflows within a specific client to their specific needs.
And Konstantin, do you use the same process?
Roughly the same, right? Roughly the same. So obviously feedback is always incorporated, and we do it in usually 2 layers. The element of sort of like self-reinforced learning that Farhan is kind of hinting to, we do that, but also like periodically we do model upgrades or complete revisions. What else could be done? How a new approach is like. So that's when we go to the new generation once in a 2 or 3 years.
Andreas.
Yes, just on the data, I had been pitched by someone who had only AI experience about starting an AI hedge fund, and didn't think much of unstructured data as being a component to it. Just a little history. I used to have a client in the 90s called Renaissance Technologies. And back then they were using neural nets and millions upon data in stocks, bonds, equities, commodities, and currencies. And they had hired over 100 PhDs, either computer science, physics, or math, and had done so well that they returned all the billions that they invested on behalf of clients because they're making too much money and they just kept it on their own. So one of the interesting things they did, not only are they coming up with models that would predict when these assets or asset classes would go up or down so they could buy or sell them, they also predict second and tertiary models would depict when a model wasn't working, what was the next evolution of model that they should be using in that particular environment. So talking about that's data they collected mainly from public sources and equities and wasn't subject to these types of scrubbing and other issues that banks have in other areas. Many of them have merged over the years. JP Morgan is now one of 70 companies. Every time they merge, they're putting a different amalgamate of data, and it's not matching one-to-one. And now that they've managed to melt it together, they can't really understand what they really had to begin with. Luckily, some of this stuff is like social security number, phone number, whatnot, but also credit ratings and the like. But anyway, data is key. The cleaner it is, the better off you are.
Yeah, yeah. Can I add something to what Andreas was talking a little bit, if you don't mind? So Andreas mentioned an example of Renaissance technologies, and it's a good example, again, of very short-term trading. I know for sure that they were mostly trading within a day or maybe 2-3 days max. They will never, so that's trading. It's pure extracting inefficiencies. They were not really investing. I know that for sure. And that's fine, again. So again, like it still sits within my initial assessment that it's less than 0.1% of all investing is done by computers, by truly invested, right? Truly invested, right? By AI at least. So again, in Renaissance, that's why they gave all the money back, because you cannot scale it. Those inefficiencies are very compartmentalized. You cannot expand it. Those are small short-term inefficiencies, which they became, these were brilliant guys, and they are. But they just, the opportunity, it's not like you're investing in NVIDIA for the next 5 years. No, these were like very short-term trades.
So can you each talk about the market opportunities that you represent or that you're looking at in terms of the AI application? I think Andreas, you've got more of a portfolio point of view, but
sure. Right now, I'm involved with raising capital for a robotics company called Mind Children out in Vashon Island in Washington State. They've come up, or in the development process, I should say, rather, with a short-term robot about 3 feet tall, whose job is to measure the vital signs of handicapped children and alert the nurses when there's any issues. And also they come with a screen on their chest, which they use to deliver educational content to these, by and large, bedridden children. That's one. Two is Rejuve Bio. That's a longevity AI that's basically using its research capabilities and differentiated data to come up with supplements that have proven to reduce things like Alzheimer's and other long age maladies. And third, another raise we were just actually meeting earlier today, AGI as a service on a decentralized basis. So not using the mass data out there that Copilot, Gemini, and the others use, but basically only the data sets for its client base. And that's focused on financial services, medicine, and logistics.
Andreas, when you look at these deals, do you wonder about adoption pace or speed? I mean, that's always a question, right?
Well, the two first ones are smaller. Let's call that 5 to 10. I'm not that worried about the adoption for that. The other raise is more in the lines of 250 to 500, and then that's more concerning just size-wise. However, we do have clients taking and testing their AI, or AGI rather, which might end up having those clients providing the capital for the raise. So we'll see. But in general, I mean, last year, I read somewhere, I don't know, it was PitchBook, 37 billion raised in AI. A third of that was the 11 billion that Microsoft gave Sam Altman. It's not exactly a glowing marketplace, but there are some signs of life. I think today, Microsoft and BlackRock announced that they were raising a $1 billion fund to invest in AI earlier this morning.
I mean, Maureen kind of talked about this earlier, in terms of who's investing in what, but nobody's really broken out the AI component in VC from everything else, right? Because I think that tells a story. It's actually similar to the story of the big tech companies versus all the small fish, right? And every other company that's out there, where they have this amazing, tentpole performance versus others. So I think we need to drill deeper into the AI funding and what's the basis of stuff. So Konstantin, can you address the same issue we were talking about, which was that what's the application, and do you worry about speed of adoption? I mean, you've been doing this for a couple of years, I think. So, and you have a couple of clients on Wall Street, or a few clients on Wall Street. I'm not sure how many. Obviously, it's probably better that you have been positioned.
Well, we were doing this for 7 years, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. So talk about your positioning and speed of adoption and what's your model and how you intend to grow this business.
So essentially, we have two businesses. First one is actually giving access to our predictive tools for people to use our forecasts live, right? For example, if you're a commodities trader, we'll give you a forecast for relevant commodities. If you're a bond trader, we'll give you a forecast for relevant bonds and so on. And we think opportunity is huge, because essentially to build something like that in-house, you need to hire at least several months and work very hard with them for several years. Again, we started approximately 2015. We have dozens of clients in the city of London, in New York, in Canada, and in Asia, and so on. And it's very, very hard to build something like that in-house. Very hard, very hard. In fact, we know that even the most reputable investment houses, they don't really have much like that in place. It's years of investment, which might never pay off. So we think opportunity is immense, because investment industry is a big part of our of the financial services industry, and the pace of adoption remains slow. Humans are inherently conservative, and they are reluctant to embed into what they see as the core of their process to achieve.
So can you talk more? Is the opportunity with traders necessarily, or what? Is there a possibility of an off-the-shelf product, or there's a heavy amount of tailoring that needs to be done with what you do?
We offer mostly mildly customized products. So it's essentially, we have the core of the product, which is kind of like off the shelf, and we do mild customization by client's needs. So it's actually pretty flexible toolkit that you can apply to your asset class of your geography. Basically, we cover everything in the world, which is investable. Everything is a pretty big statement, and that's going to be usable. And the idea is actually, again, the biggest insight that we bring to the table is providing linkages from other areas into what people invest in. It might sound very strange, but even trades in something that people say like, hey, I'm buying NVIDIA or something like, but moves in NVIDIA could be correlated to the price of commodities or Australian dollar or Norwegian krona or Brazilian real, something that is not obvious.
Yep.
Konstantin, are you doing it for private market investing too, where there's not so much data on price for an asset or performance of an asset?
Good question. We do work with private investors a little bit, especially on the private credit side or private loans, because they actually very well could be proxied by public interest rate, by public bonds, including credit. That's what we do, because the linkage is actually pretty strong there. But when, let's assume private equity, like, we don't really do that, because again, it's highly specific, and we need essentially some sort of like daily trading marks to understand whether it's getting.
Okay. I mean, I assume that when you're doing privates, there's a lot less data. Risk management really matters a lot as well. Like your historical models for doing this sort of thing, and then being able to model out the future opportunities. I mean, if you're doing equities versus lending, I mean, lending, I think it's a risk it's far more risk management, but on the equity side, you want to see upside, et cetera.
Correct.
How
I mean,
do
lending
you
private loans,
calculate that, right?
lending again, private loans, they actually trade, I mean, like, they could be proxied by private credit by, by public credit, i.e. private bonds pretty well. So we deal with that all the time. It's actually pretty good proxy. Especially if you're honest about the sort of like, about not smoothing the noise, which is inevitable in trading.
Somebody posited at our event last week that, so I said, you know what, there's not a lot of innovation on Wall Street. They kind of bang out products and, they get the same 6%, 7% return, whatever you want every year. And I was asking, is there an actual, greenfields opportunity for an AI powerhouse to grow in the finance world? And who would that be? Et cetera. And then Andy Fish said that that's already happened and that these 3 quant funds pretty much dominate. They won't tell anybody anything about their success. What do you think about that? Has it already happened and we'll never know? Or
it's a great question. I hear it all the time from friends and the clients are, if you are so good, why don't you start your own fund? Okay, we do actually manage money for clients and friends because we do apply. So essentially we have 2 businesses. We're already doing that. We have buy side and sell side. However, we are not, there are plenty of people who are trying to produce philosophically selling ideas and some quantitative signals to buy side. Of course, it's a way of the world Wall Street works. However, we haven't seen anyone. It's what we do. We haven't seen anyone, and I wish it was any other way because again we're kind of like pioneering, but that's why it's actually it's easy to grow the market when you have a big company and people are rushing into that, right? So I think it's an opportunity to, and yet it's inevitability because I think the times when a human was able to think through all possible combinations of political risks and economic risk and business risk and valuations and currency moves and everything in his head are like long gone. That's impossible, right? Even the best of the best long-term investors like even Warren Buffett are not able to produce excess returns anymore.
Right, but he wasn't using AI.
No, to the best of my knowledge,
he has a very different. I think Warren Buffett has a very different model than most people, right? Because he's the proverbial person who's become the market, right? So he does best when there's downturns because he's cash heavy. I mean, in many cases. I mean, he did great in 2009.
8 and 9, yeah, you did.
2008 and 9, he did pretty well.
About GeoStock.
But I think that I guess that some of the. I mean, you tell me where the money's being made in AI. Is it done on volume, speed, new opportunities? What do you think in terms of trading, hedge funds, finance, etc.?
Again, right now, most of AI applications are on most of the back office. So they automate trading, simple classification, preparing for the tax, extracting, say, earnings releases and news. For example, there was the Fed day today, right? And it probably 2.5 seconds before it was actually even published in official public sources, like AI has already decided what to trade or not, and short term. And obviously, these were short-term trades, which influence added to the noise of the market. But again, we are yet to see that somebody will be offering systematically this product for service as a third-party service, right? We do that. It's not an easy exercise convincing people that convincing people to reinvent themselves, their process.
Farhan, can you talk about your application and why it's not just e-learning, but it's AI?
Yes. So our applications are primarily being used on 2 vectors. First is learning, and the second one is workflow automation. So learning automation and workflow automation. You implement our system in a learning environment, and the learning actually gets better, and we have proof points for that. That's what our clients pay for on the learning industry side. The other one, which is workflow automation, which is you make existing processes more efficient, much better, much more accurate. So we see that happening at the lowest rung, as well as all kinds of complex processes can be made better, more efficient, and much more accurate by implementing AI within those, or inserting AI within those processes.
So you guys have talked about AI in the legal profession. I have a hard time with that, and I'll tell you my analogous story. So for years, radiology has been done in India, right? So if you're a radiologist in New York, 100% of X-rays get sent to India, and doctors in India make the judgments, and then they take out what they call the 10% toughest, and that goes back to the doctor, the radiologist in New York, and they say, okay, the judgment was correct. Well, and they sign off on all of them because the New York doctor is licensed, right? So I think that AI will probably help reduce the work of that person in India. That'll get bypassed before the doctor who's licensed in New York gets bypassed, because somebody still has to have liability for the judgment, right? They're the tool user, right? I don't think a tool, if it made a mistake, would be liability free. So I have the same issue with legal. What are your thoughts? Right, because lawyers are licensed in state by state, and if they make mistakes, there's liability. And
I agree. I think the law firms are going to benefit. They're just going to reduce their cost base.
Right, and I
So
mean, I've heard
lawyers
already
will
there's a
stay,
lot of
the
there's a
associates
lot of
will
legal
go.
research being done in India, for example. There's actually a lot of American trained attorneys who have moved back to India and started these 200, 100 person staff.
Yeah, the same
companies
thing
that-
for investment
Yeah,
banks.
legal process outsourcing is a real thing.
The process outsourcing is, I'm saying, is AI going to get rid of the company that was outsourced to, or is it going to reduce the staffing at law firms in the USA?
I think it's going to make everybody much more efficient. So jobs wouldn't, and this is my personal opinion, jobs would evolve. They won't get cut out. Like we've seen that with all kinds of technological revolution. So if a certain kind of jobs get cut, the people get trained on doing other more effective jobs or much more specialized jobs. Right? So people,
Yeah, and I'll give you another healthcare example, which is that people who, I mean, a lot of doctors, there's a huge wave of doctors retiring, and I mean, if you work for one of these Medicare shops, you're seeing 30 patients a day, your notes are crap, right? So now that there's a little bit of AI taking notes for you, you now have more time to spend looking at the quality of your notes and the quality of your care. But
Yep.
I mean, there's going to be more work for you, right?
Yes.
And I have another comment from the audience here. Maureen?
Yeah, so having doctors in my family, that's absolutely the case. My brother wants to retire, and he's like 50, and he's an EP cardiologist, so he should retire. So he's fed up of taking notes, and he's in New Zealand right now. I have another sister who has an accent, and they do use AI, but it can't figure out the accent, so she still ends up having to do all that work. So I think it's helping, but it's still not. I think they'll just put more work down on the doctors, because that's where they get the money, and it'll just become. I don't necessarily know if it's going to really help the doctors, at least at this stage. The second thing I would say is that businesses who are trying to use AI now, it seems like many of them have hired a lot of the engineers or the coders, but I think what's really going to be pivotal is that you're going to have to either train or orientate people that can have the business case to work with the coders or the people that are developing the software to actually really make it work and be more effective. Because I think what people are also not taking into account is that there's going to be a J curve to investing in AI. And, you could be making these investments, but how do you know at this stage you're making the right investments, or that you're planning for the staff to be able to evaluate, like, okay, we built it, so now is it really working? And so it's
IBM has been gambling on AI for years, and it hasn't worked out well for them. So
yeah, and so I think these are, and I'm not necessarily, I I don't assume that just because someone loses their job to AI, that they'll be trained to be able to do something more technical. I think that's a little idealistic, you know?
Oh, no, no. I would say that, you know, AI is, like all tech, is destructive to jobs.
I would say, I agree. So the back office functions will go. How they get reskilled, retooled, that's a different story, but at least here we'll be able to, save a lot of money because that will be done by AI. And it's not without the humor error, right? So this main person here, sitting here, signing off still is liable because that's
Exactly,
their
right. They have
license
to know
on the
the
line.
tool.
Exactly, whether it's a lawyer or a doctor, so now they have to pay attention. Definitely, because even previously with people doing it, it's no different, right? It's still on your head. The second thing I
I
think
mean,
is
planes have lots of technology.
exactly.
If you make a mistake, you know, Delta plane crashes, Delta still gets sued, and so does Boeing.
Exactly.
Yeah, keep on
And the
going.
second piece is skill sets, right? So when we talk about, to your point, we are training a lot of professionals in their core skills, like doctors and engineers and lawyers. The other key skill set that's going to come up is how to use AI. Because you can make tools, but if nobody's using it, the change management aspect of it, they don't know technology. Having the best technical people building the best tool in the world is not going to help at all if the person using it has no idea how to use it. So understanding that part as well and training all these people to say, hey, you'll have a co-pilot helping you in this 5 areas, and this is how you can best use this tool to make your life easy. I think it's going to be key for no matter what professional we look at.
I still think there is a barrier because of licensing.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's going to be significant, whether you're a broker, a real estate broker, whatever. You know, if something's missed, there has to be.
Yeah, and there'll be the compliance people who get involved too, because it'll be, again, back to the liability. But I do think that, not to be underestimated, having been a business person trying to work with a bunch of quants and engineers and coders to get what I wanted, that's a skill in itself to have that translation. And also to, even after you spend all the exhausting time describing what you want, you have to also budget in a lot of time to test it, right? So it has to be like, one, you have to make sure you have the user interface right so that people will use it. Then you also have to make sure, because it takes usually several iterations before it gets right.
I think a great example for Konstantin is if I was teaching an AI to be a fiduciary, what would that mean? Think about it. Never happened. I was hoping, Andreas, are you still there? That maybe you can kind of address, you know, this from a portfolio point of view, because you probably have more of a holistic viewpoint, and specialized. So
I can give it a holistic one. 2 million years ago, we were Homo sapiens, we were hunting and foraging. 10,000 years, we again started agriculture. And with monocultural farming, one person could feed 100. That meant 99 people had to go out and find jobs outside of farming. And they did that for 8,000 years until the Industrial Revolution. And that kicked off in late 1800s. And the pace of change and job reductions is nowhere near what we're going to see here if one large VC in California prediction that 85% of Americans will lose their jobs comes true is almost unconscionable, because you can't retrain those people quick enough. And those of you who don't remember 1929, the Great Panic and the worst depression, we got 24% unemployment. Who's going to buy this guy's? Who's going to pay the subscriptions for AI when 85% of the workforce is out of a job? So I really
we have data on this already, right?
Some such grandiose statements and really don't do anything to do anything about it.
So some of the data that we have on this is that how many people who worked at map makers or Kodak or, you know, old school telephone makers with wires, you know, got jobs in tech afterwards?
Yeah.
I'd say very few.
Well,
Right? Those people, I don't know what happened to those guys in Rochester. Right?
I would agree with Andreas strongly, and actually I think Farhan was also mentioning that the history of humanity, any innovation improves productivity, but vast majority of these gains go to the consumer, right? If we look at actually, even I think Andreas's analogy to farming is actually classic. It's like because like even like 300 years ago or 400 years ago, like 97% of population was doing basic farming, right? And with increase of productivity, right now we have maybe 2 or 3% of population in Western Europe or in the US involved in the farming because just they saw it good enough, right? So that freed up the rest of the humanity to do whatever they want, right? And who benefits the consumer benefits, right? And so will be with AI. There was a history, like jobs will be evolving and so on. And I even can share, like, even taking the most basic industries, like which have not really evolved much. Like I'll share for the fun of it, say airlines tickets for the last 30 years. As much as people complain about high oil and wage prices for pilots, essentially in real prices adjusted for inflation, airlines tickets were dropping pretty much with ups and downs. So again, most of the benefits of even the plane technology has not evolved a lot, but small incremental improvements all accrue to the consumer. And that will happen with AI as well, in my opinion, right? There will be obviously some major gainers on the way there, but history tells us that it's very hard to sustain that edge, and consumer and humanity in general will benefit the most.
Well, if you guys have any idea who's going to be the AI supermarket, please let me know as soon as possible. And my final question is, so I've got to say that most of you guys all have roots in other countries, it seems like. Can you talk about the international scene for AI and, what's your viewpoint? Because I'm going to predict that Europe's going to be a slow adapter because they like to protect jobs there, and also because there's not a lot of energy for AI, right? But I would say that places like Asia South Korea might adapt it pretty quickly, right? So can you give some perspective on the international outlook for AI? Andreas?
Sure. So I do a lot of sourcing of a lot of our investments in Europe. Recently, the European Technische Hochschule, which is one of the biggest or one of the larger engineering schools in Zurich, has announced that it's becoming the AI hub for Europe, at least on the continent, as I believe there are some London universities that are doing the same for the UK. Concurrently with that, if you go to Doha, Qatar, or the UAE in Dubai, they're also contesting to be the AI hub for the Middle East region. The difference between the Swiss and the UAE and Doha is that UAE and Doha are considerably better funded and are out to prove the other one wrong in their quest for the head of AI hub of the Middle East.
I've got a highly favorable viewpoint of the Swiss when it comes to doing things. They said they were going to become the European capital of crypto, and they've done pretty well in Zug. But you're right. I mean, they are underfunded, and they tend to wear not very nice clothing either. So, you know what I'm talking about. I just look at how they match up their outfits. Konstantin?
We ironically, let me say a couple of words, right?
You're off mic.
Yeah. So if you look at what was actually became a revolution in AI, at least in terms of mass adoption of LLM and generative AI, this paper, which was written like a few years ago by the guys essentially working at Google. So essentially this guy, Ilya Polosukhin, the kid from Ukraine, wrote the whole thing. He conceptualized it with another guys. But even just naively, again, looking at the last names and first names, you can realize the guys that came from non-US, right? And again, it's just reality of the world that we have lots of high-quality brains who are hungry, and they see innovation as a way to realize themselves and achieve something better. So this is actually, again, a good example that a great deal of innovation, even though it's done kind of like in the US, yet the genesis, some inspiration and some educational background routinely comes out of US. And I think it's not a political statement, but there's a lot of high quality AI people in India, in China, in Eastern Europe. And France is doing a remarkable success. Like you gotta look how much money French or LLM sort of like enhanced companies like Mistral have raised. It's phenomenal. France is not a huge country, like maybe 80 million people, but the amount of contribution they are doing to development AI is way disproportionate, like in a good way. So
I think France has always been a leader in tech in software development in Europe, right?
and historically, many centuries ago in mathematics as well.
There you go, right? So that's related, right? And do you guys think access to energy will be a differentiator? I mean, obviously Qatar and UAE have tremendous amounts of energy that they can spend on this versus Europe. Andreas, maybe, or Konstantin, maybe. We're gonna get to Asia in a couple of seconds.
It's unconscionable, but I mean, the king of, or the crown prince of Saudi Arabia is worth $1 trillion. The head of Qatar is $350 billion. These are numbers that dwarf our American billionaires. They're not short of cash. I do want to throw one, I think, out there. IIT in Hyderabad in India, I believe, is also becoming a AI hub. So I didn't want to forget about them as well.
Right, and I understand that India just got some cheap oil from Russia. So, Farhan, your thoughts?
Cheap oil is good.
Well, I'll go back to the previous question or
Internationalization of AI.
So different countries and different jurisdictions are building on AI in very different ways. India, for example, there's this whole initiative about AI for public, where it is being pushed by the government as a public utility. So that's a very different way of developing this ecosystem as opposed to what you see in the US and probably most of Western Europe as well. And we're talking about AI at scale, a scale of 1.4 billion people. So the applications that get developed, the way they get developed, the way they get deployed, it's very, very different from what you would see here. And we are already seeing that divergence shaping up.
Yes, and actually on the, since Marty, you had mentioned the energy component of it, and actually kind of like linking a little bit to the previous panel when guys were talking a lot and ladies were talking a lot about energy. I mean, there is obviously, we will probably experience some sort of energy renaissance, at least power generation renaissance, in all centers where AI will be deployed, right? People talking about nuclear being big, and we see more global sentiment shifting towards more favorably towards the nuclear energy, including coincidentally again in France, and so on, right? So, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of like essentially highlights the gaps and holes in our ecosystem, which needs to be upgraded to facilitate that process.
Yeah, guys, it's a shame that Darwin wasn't able to make this call, this conference, because he's been doing AI with China for 10 years, and I think that there's an AI race that's ongoing between the United States and China, as well as quantum computing, which I think will change everything. Especially, I think it's going to be a security issue for everything that's done on the internet going forward with when quantum computing comes around. I think, so I was talking to Dan Moore, who presented to our group many years ago on crypto, and we asked him, so what do you think about, quantum computing with regard to Bitcoin? And he said, well, we'll have to get quantum Bitcoin. So I think it's, it's kind of it's like the space race. It's a real, the money that's going to be spent on this stuff will be out of control. So anyway, thanks so much. Very thought-provoking panel, and appreciate a lot. Thanks so much.
Thank you.